listeners. Welcome to another episode on the Global Mic.
All right, so let's jump right into this whole TikTok thing. It's been a wild ride for this app. I mean, from dance challenges to, national security risks. It seems like every week there's a new headline about TikTok.
Yeah, I think what's so fascinating about this is how quickly things can change, in the digital world. I mean, one day it's all fun and games. The next, it's, serious talks about bans and regulations and freedom of speech.
Exactly. And today we're going to take a deep dive into the latest twist in this whole saga. We're talking about a potential ban in the U.S., some last-minute scrambling to save the app, and, just some serious political maneuvering all around this one app. So to make sense of all this, we're going to be looking at some news articles from just a few days ago.
Right. I mean, you may have heard that TikTok actually started shutting down in the U.S., then parts of it came back online, and now it's kind of hanging in the balance.
Yeah, it's a total roller coaster. But to understand how we got here, we need to kind of go back to the beginning. Can you give us a quick recap of the whole TikTok ownership issue and why it's been so controversial?
Sure. So basically, the app is owned by ByteDance, which is a Chinese company, and that's raised concerns, within the U.S. government about data security and potential influence from the Chinese government. So to address these concerns, a law was passed that basically says TikTok is banned in the U.S. unless ByteDance sells it to a non-Chinese entity.
Okay, so it's not just about, teenagers making funny videos. This is about who controls the data, right? I mean, we're talking millions of Americans using TikTok every day. So, what are the specific concerns about data security, and why is the U.S. government so worried about this?
Well, the fear is that the Chinese government could access user data through ByteDance. And that could include everything from personal information to browsing habits, the whole 9 yards. So this raises concerns about potential surveillance censorship and even the spread of misinformation.
Okay, yeah, that's starting to make sense why this is such a big deal. So was this law banning TikTok just signed recently?
Actually, it was signed by President Biden a while back, but it was scheduled to take effect just yesterday on January 19th, 2025. That's when things really started to heat up.
And wasn't there talk about Biden not enforcing the ban? What happened with that?
Right. Biden had initially indicated that he wouldn't enforce the ban, essentially leaving the decision up to, former President Trump.
Wait, Trump? But wasn't he the one who first called for a ban on TikTok? What's going on here?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting turn of events. So Trump, who is scheduled to be inaugurated again tomorrow, took to his social media platform Truth Social, and he was urging TikTok to stay online.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
So why the sudden change of heart?
Well, his reasoning was that he wants the platform to be available to broadcast his inauguration ceremony.
Wow, okay, so that's a pretty big twist. Did TikTok actually get shut down, or did Trump's plea work?
Well, it was a bit of a back and forth. On Saturday evening, TikTok was removed from U.S. app stores and service for American users was suspended. But then on Sunday, things started changing again. TikTok began coming back online in spurts. And the company actually thanked Trump for providing clarity and assurance to their service providers.
So Trump steps in at the last minute and potentially saves the app. I'm guessing this isn't the end of the story, though, right?
You're absolutely right. The situation is far from resolved. While Trump's intervention may have bought TikTok some time, the fundamental issue of ByteDance's ownership remains a point of contention.
So what are the options here? What could happen next?
Well, Trump has said that he plans to issue an executive order extending the ban's deadline. This would give ByteDance more time to potentially negotiate a deal with a U.S. company.
Okay, so that sounds like it could be a reasonable solution. Does everyone agree with this approach, though?
Not exactly. While some see this as a way to address the national security concerns, while allowing TikTok to continue operating in the U.S., others are pushing for a stricter interpretation of the existing law.
So who's pushing back, and what are they saying?
We're seeing strong opposition from several Republican lawmakers, including Mike Johnson, Tom Cotton, and Pete Ricketts. They're arguing that the law is clear. ByteDance needs to divest, meaning sell off their ownership of TikTok completely. No compromises, no extensions.
So we've got a bit of standoff here. On one side, Trump is looking to extend the deadline and potentially allow for some kind of deal. And on the other side, some Republicans are pushing for a complete and immediate divestiture. So what does the law actually say about this? Is there any legal wiggle room?
Well, the law does allow for a 90-day extension if certain criteria are met, which is what Trump seems to be aiming for with his executive order. But there's a key detail that complicates things.
Okay, what's that?
The law includes a 20% ownership cap for any company owned by what they call a foreign adversary.
Hmm.
This means that ByteDance as a Chinese company can't own more than 20% of TikTok if it wants to operate in the U.S.
So the big question is, could ByteDance somehow be part of a joint venture without actually exceeding that 20% limit? Is that even possible?
That's the million-dollar question. And to really understand what's at stake, we need to delve a little deeper into the nuances of this ownership cap and what it means for TikTok's future.
Okay, so this ownership cap seems to be the crux of the issue. What exactly constitutes a foreign adversary, and how does this 20% rule work in practice? We'll unpack all of that after a quick break.
So the term foreign adversary, as it's used in this law, it's a pretty broad term. Essentially, it refers to any country that the U.S. government considers to be, a potential threat to national security. And China definitely falls under that umbrella, which is why this whole ownership cap is causing so much friction.
So if the U.S. government sees China as a threat, wouldn't that make any involvement from ByteDance a red flag? I mean, regardless of the percentage.
That's the argument being made by those pushing for a complete divestiture. They see any level of Chinese ownership as a potential risk, and they're worried that even with a minority stake, ByteDance could still exert influence over TikTok's operations.
Okay, so what kind of influence are we talking about here? Could they really control what people see on TikTok, even with a smaller ownership stake?
It's certainly a possibility. Think about things like data security, content moderation, even algorithm design.
Yeah.
Even with a smaller stake, ByteDance could potentially have input on these aspects of TikTok, which raises concerns about, censorship, data leaks, or even the spread of propaganda.
Okay, so I can see why some lawmakers are hesitant about any sort of compromise. But what about the argument that a complete ban would infringe on freedom of speech? I mean, that's a pretty big deal, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's a key point being raised by those who oppose the ban. They argue that banning a popular social media platform sets a dangerous precedent, and it could have a chilling effect on free speech.
It's interesting because we're seeing this debate play out on multiple levels, right? You have the national security concerns, but you also have these fundamental questions about freedom of expression and the role of government in regulating the internet. It's not an easy issue to untangle.
Exactly, and we haven't even touched on the potential economic impacts of a ban. Think about all the creators who rely on TikTok for income, not to mention the businesses that advertise on the platform. A ban would have a ripple effect throughout the digital economy.
So we have this complex web of national security concerns, freedom of speech arguments, and economic implications. Where do we even begin to find a solution that addresses all of these factors?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, there's no easy answer. But one thing is clear. This situation highlights the growing tension between governments and tech giants. And it's a trend we're likely to see more of in the future.
It's almost like we're seeing a power struggle happening in the digital space, right? Governments are trying to assert control, but these tech companies have become so influential that they can push back in ways we'd never seen before.
It's a new era of digital diplomacy, and we're still figuring out the rules of engagement. What's happening with TikTok is just one example of this broader trend. We're seeing similar debates around data privacy, content moderation, and antitrust issues with other tech giants like Facebook, Google, Amazon, you name it.
It's a lot to keep up with, but it's also incredibly fascinating, isn't it? It feels like we're witnessing a pivotal moment in history, where the lines between the digital and physical worlds are blurring, and the stakes couldn't be higher.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is how much of this debate is playing out in real time. On the very platforms we're talking about, we see politicians using social media to shape public opinion, tech CEOs engaging in public spats with lawmakers, and everyday users are becoming more aware of the power dynamics at play.
It's like the whole world is watching this TikTok saga unfold and everyone has an opinion. But let's shift gears for a moment and focus on what this all means for the average TikTok user. They're probably caught in the middle of all this, wondering if their favorite app is going to disappear.
Yeah, it's certainly a valid concern, and it's hard to offer any guarantees at this point. The situation is incredibly fluid, with new developments emerging almost daily. But I think it's important for users to remember that even if TikTok does face a ban or significant changes in the U.S., the underlying issues we've discussed aren't going away.
So you're saying this is bigger than just one app?
Absolutely. The challenges of data privacy, content moderation, and the global influence of tech companies, these are all issues we'll be grappling with for years to come, regardless of TikTok's fate.
So what does this mean for our relationship with social media? Should we be rethinking how we use these platforms and the information we share?
It's definitely a good time to reflect on those questions. We need to be more aware of the data we're sharing, the algorithms that shape our feeds, and the potential influence these platforms have on our thoughts, beliefs, and actions.
Yeah, it's a lot to process, and it can feel overwhelming at times. What advice would you give to someone who wants to stay informed about these issues, without getting completely bogged down by the constant stream of news and opinions?
My advice would be to focus on developing critical thinking skills. Don't just accept what you see at face value. You know, question the sources of information, look for different perspectives, and try to understand the underlying motivations and agendas at play.
So basically become a more discerning consumer of information. That's good advice for navigating not just the digital world, but life in general, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and it's a skill that's becoming increasingly essential in our interconnected world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the legal and political battles surrounding TikTok, the national security concerns, the arguments for and against a ban, and the broader implications for the future of tech regulation. But there's still one big question hanging in the air: what's going to happen to TikTok?
That's the question everyone's asking, and the answer is still shrouded in uncertainty. But let's take a closer look at the potential scenarios and what they could mean for the millions of Americans who use this platform every day.
So where do we go from here? What are the most likely outcomes for TikTok in the US?
Well, as we've discussed, the situation is incredibly fluid. There are a lot of moving parts. But I think we can break it down into a few key scenarios. The first, and perhaps least likely at this point, is a complete and immediate ban.
Even after Trump's intervention, is that still a possibility?
It's hard to say for sure, but it seems less probable given Trump's recent statements and his intention to issue an executive order extending the deadline. However, we can't rule it out entirely, especially if the pressure from those opposing any deal with ByteDance continues to mount.
Okay, so a complete ban is still on the table, though perhaps less likely. What's another possible outcome?
The second scenario involves some form of a deal or compromise. This could involve ByteDance selling a majority stake in TikTok to a U.S. company, or forming a joint venture with stricter oversight, or even agreeing to even more stringent data security measures and transparency protocols.
So basically finding a way to address the national security concerns while allowing TikTok to continue operating in the U.S. in some capacity.
Exactly, and this seems to be the path that Trump is currently pursuing. And it's likely the outcome that many TikTok users are hoping for. But even if a deal is reached, it's likely to face significant scrutiny and pushback from those who believe that any involvement from ByteDance is unacceptable.
So a deal isn't a guaranteed solution. Is there a middle ground here?
That brings us to the third scenario, which is perhaps the most unpredictable. It's possible that we could see a prolonged period of legal battles, political maneuvering, and regulatory back and forth, with no clear resolution in sight.
So a stalemate. TikTok in limbo.
Essentially, yes.
Mm-hmm.
This outcome would create a lot of uncertainty for TikTok, its users, and the wider tech industry. It could also set a precedent for how future tech regulations are handled, potentially leading to a more fragmented and uncertain digital landscape.
Wow, so even if TikTok survives this immediate crisis, its future in the U.S. is still far from certain.
That's the reality of the situation. There are no easy answers, and the stakes are incredibly high. This is a story that's still being written, and the ending is far from clear.
It's amazing how much this whole TikTok saga has revealed about the complexities of technology, national security, international relations, and even our own relationship with social media.
It's a real-world case study in the challenges of regulating a rapidly evolving digital landscape. And it highlights the importance of informed public discourse and critical thinking as we navigate these uncharted waters.
Well said. And to our listeners out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about this whole TikTok situation? Does it make you rethink your own relationship with social media? How do you see this impacting the future of technology and global politics?
This is a conversation that deserves our attention, and we encourage you to keep exploring these issues and engaging in thoughtful discussions. The digital world is constantly evolving, and it's up to all of us to shape